Hi folks, this is Jack Spirko from the Survival Podcast with a pretty serious video today. This weekend on the Zello network that we have a channel set up there where a lot of the listeners of the audience get together and talk about preparedness and other things and honestly look out after each other. I was on there this weekend and I heard about a video from a guy named MainPrepper, who I've heard of before, who had a new video that's kind of gone viral, gotten like 70 or 80,000 views or something at that point. And when it was described to me, I thought, this guy's probably off his rocker, and I excused myself from the conversation on the network and logged off and went and watched it and came back. And I don't think he's off his rocker, but I do think he's wrong in a way. Let's start out with where he's right. Where he's right is his description of combat. It's as accurate as anybody can possibly try to explain combat to a person who's never seen or experienced anything like it. His assessment of movies like Saving Private Ryan, Band of Brothers as being the closest thing that you can look at and see what real combat's like, dead on. His assertion that the United States government's lying to you when they tell you that our enemies are cowards because they won't come out and fight like a man and things like that, spot on. Fighting from behind cover, using improvised devices, etc., is a pretty good description of the way that Washington fought the Revolutionary War using a combination of regulars known as the Continentals and a combination of irregulars known as the militia. The United States foundational war of independence is really a great blueprint and used often by many across the world, including people that don't like us, for how you fight a guerrilla war. It's not cowardly to fight from cover. One of the most glorified warriors that we have in our military today is who? The sniper. Do snipers come out and fight like a man, or do they fire from cover 1,000 yards away? And we'll have the audacity to look at a person fighting for their homeland, whether we agree with them or not, that's what they're doing. Whether we think they should be in charge or not, that's what they're doing, and say that they're wrong to do that when it's okay for us to do that. I mean, this was all spot on. The concept that some of you guys out there are investing thousands of dollars in kitted up handguns and you don't have a good home defense weapon, a good battle rifle, spot on. The fact that people have, $1,000 scopes on a rifle that aren't even zeroed in and won't do you any good if you ever need to use it, spot on. The fact that you should buy a good basic rifle, buy ammunition, train it, run it, and learn how to do it, spot on. The problem is the belief that there's only one scenario that we're headed to, and statements that MainPrepper made like, when the lights go out and stay out, and I'm 100% sure they will. I have a problem when anybody's 100% sure of anything, because you're trying to say that you know the future and you don't. And the problem with preparing for a without rule of law scenario, to the exclusion of anything else, is that you're only planning for failure. It's like buying life insurance and then only planning to die. How is your wife going to pay the mortgage since you don't have a job next week? Well, when I die, she'll get the insurance money. It's not a good answer unless you somehow know that you're going to die or are about to arrange your own death. So when we buy life insurance, we plan both to live and to die. And if we're smart, we plan to be very successful in life and what we're going to fall back on if we're not so successful. We plan to stay healthy, and we plan for if we're disabled. We have multiple contingencies. And the concept that we are going to exist in this nation in its current state, sea to shining sea, border to border, one end to the other, 100% without rule of law, is absolutely asinine in all but the 1 in 100 billion possible scenarios. If the sun creates a coronal mass ejection that's just perfect and hits the grid just perfect, maybe. If we get a global pandemic with a 70% death rate, maybe. If we get a coordinated multiple EMP strike by multiple enemies of this country done in a perfect 1 in a million shot, maybe. And it's still not going to be that way because power vacuums are always filled. But the big thing that most people are actually concerned about right now, as far as the collapse of this government, myself included, are the economy. We look at a $16 trillion debt that will be a $22 trillion debt in 4 years, no matter who's president. We look at unfunded liabilities of our government crossing $222 trillion. And we intrinsically know that this game cannot be played forever. This can only be kicked so long. We have quantitative easing infinity now. I think it will work, but only for a time, and it's designed to prepare for a collapse, to help the banks, the Federal Reserve, and the government prepare for the coming collapse of the dollar. And I think that when people say the lights are going to go out, no, that's the most realistic scenario that people have in mind. The problem with it is it takes out all the contingencies that the government has. All the things the government can do. The fact that the biggest prepper around right now, even though sometimes they come out with statements that tell you to prepare and then they come out and double talk the next day and say, if you're preparing too much, you might be a terrorist. It's like a bad redneck joke. But the biggest prepper on planet Earth today is the United States federal government. They're more prepared than we realize. Now, they're not prepared to take care of you. And this is a place where I've got to be very specific with you. And I really want you to get this. And I don't want to hear stupid, smart-ass remarks in the comment section about not understanding it, because I understand it. I live and breathe it. I've done this for 4 years now, researching the history and the future and what the two things tell us. What most people fail to understand is that when you tell somebody, well, you expect it to be here and it's not going to be that bad, that you're saying it's all going to be sunshine, roses, unicorns, and angel farts. It's not. It's going to be very dark, very bad, and very oppressive, and there will be pockets of without rule of law for different periods of time, and you better listen to MainPrepper, and you better be prepared to deal with those. But if that's all you're prepared to deal with, you are flat out screwed. Let me just put it to you that way. Let me give you some contingencies that your government has created, and it's all part of what's called continuity of government, to make sure when these things fall apart that the government apparatus stays in place. Right now, there are tens of thousands of drones being built to occupy space over U.S. air. These drones can tell the government what you're doing, where you're at, monitor situations that could be weaponized if they wanted to, like that. Our government is building a 1 million square foot data center to be overseen by the NSA, the spook organization nobody really even talks about. Everybody talks about the CIA and the FBI. Well, the NSA is building a 1 million square foot data center. It is just to hold information. 1 million square feet is bigger than the United States Capitol building. That information is information about you and me and everybody else in this country. It's not information about what somebody's doing overseas in a cave who supposedly plans to blow us up. Do you know that the National Guard and the Guard of Alaska, the two National Guards and Reserve Forces of Alaska and Texas, when you really look at their combined firepower and how much destruction that they could do in a short period of time, basically have more firepower than the entire Nazi Germany army of World War II? Just 2 states. And unlike the Nazis, they don't have to go up against other people that have tanks, and other people that have planes, and other people that have bombers. They only have to go against rioters in a street. Please think about that. Federal law enforcement has been training, absolutely training our local, state law enforcement officials heavily in concepts about how to control crowds, how to do selective enforcement, all of these things for over a decade now. They've been doing it a lot longer than that, but they've been doing it in earnest for a decade. There's a program called the Continuity of Government that's specifically designed that if there's nuclear war, to keep the government in place. So you don't think the government that has a plan to stay in force during a nuclear war has a plan to stay in force if they have to devalue the dollar by 75% and screw you over and piss you off? You don't think they have a plan for that? There's other things. One thing that was just passed. This is a new thing. And if you think any of this is conspiracy theory, I defy you to do any kind of earnest research with it and find that it's not true. This is all publicly available information I'm giving you. The NDAA gives the government the power to indefinitely detain U.S. citizens without a trial. Anybody they see is a terrorist. Now, in times of national emergency, something that's not terrorism becomes terrorism because somebody says so. And then Executive Order 13603 was lied about. And I hate when people lie about things. Obama did this so they could seize property, seize resources, seize companies, seize. Bullshit. Obama reauthorized it and changed the people in charge of doing it. It's been on the books since the Security Act of 1950, and its real genesis goes all the way back to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and the government has, since the 1930s, had the power to seize entire stockpiles of fuel or money or anything that they want. They have this power. I'm not saying whether they should or shouldn't. I'll let you be the judge of that. I'm saying they have all of these things, and I could do a laundry list of 1,000 more things at the tip of their fingers at their disposal. And we're supposed to believe that when the economy collapses or whatever goes wrong that we're preparing for, they'll just all leave. They'll be like the James Wesley Rawls book, The President, the Congress. They'll just went so we don't know where. They went to Belgium or China or whatever, and they just want this giant power vacuum, and some idiot in Tennessee becomes the new premier or whatever. This is nonsense. These people aren't going to go away. They're not going to leave. The financial elite and the people running this government, they're not going to leave. They'll use every single thing at their disposal to maintain control and maintain power. And instead of worrying about without rule of law, you better worry about excessive rule of law. You better prepare to be self-sufficient and self-reliant and work with others and solve problems, because if you don't solve the problems in your community, the government will help you and solve them for you. This is the world that we're headed for. Not no law enforcement, excessive law enforcement, selective law enforcement. You don't build a police state and then not use it. You don't train thousands of men that are actually good, decent men to act like jackbooted thugs on command and then not have them put the boot on a person's throat when it suits you to stay in power. You don't prepare for this and then not go off on your plan when it occurs. They're preparing. They're preparing a lot. That's why you better be prepared. Yes, you better be prepared to deal with the fact that this economic breakdown will probably be like what happened in Argentina or the Soviet Union times 10, because it's bigger. But don't fall for the big lie. The big lie is, well, this is different than any time in history. Yeah, but it's not different for all the reason that people want to sell you another pallet of food or another 10 gold coins tell you. It's not different. It's not like, well, look at how many times have you heard about the Weimar Republic in Nazi Germany and hyperinflation? Did they tell you that it only lasted 3 years and there was a decade following the hyperinflation known as the Golden Era? And what knocked off the Golden Era of the Weimar Republic was the United States going into the Great Depression that spawned a global depression. And the global depression empowered a government that rose up and started a war that put the entire world into war. Did they tell you the whole story or just the hyperinflation story? Just enough to ask you for your MasterCard money to get another gold coin. That's what they tell you. It's selective historical reading. Even the people telling you the truth are only telling you the selective components of the truth that the mainstream leaves out to further their agenda. The reality is every time a government's fallen, a government's rebuilt. Every time a government's fallen and a power vacuum has occurred, it's created rioting, all the way back to when there was no such thing as a car, no such thing as electricity, no such thing as a firearm, and whether it was a boot, a gun, or a sword, it went on the throat of anybody that got in the way of the power vacuum being filled. Governments do not let a crisis go to waste, in the words of Rahm Emanuel, and they won't. If anything I've told you today sounds conspiratorial or nutjobbish, know that I think Alex Jones is a loon. He thinks these things are being done so that they can make this stuff happen. This stuff is not being done so they can make anything happen. This stuff is being done because they've already screwed it up bad enough. It's the only thing that can happen. And tyrants do not relinquish control because of problems. They use the problems to increase tyranny. It's happened every time in history. The lights will go out in some places, and they'll come back on. And they'll make a deal with you. If you shut up and be a good little boy, we'll leave them on. That's the type of thing that you're going to deal with. There'll be places where, yeah, you better be prepared. And I think you can learn a lot from MainPrepper's video. But if what you take away from it is only prepare for without rule of law, you're going to be sadly mistaken. You need to prepare for all contingencies. And I'm telling you, the contingency of tyranny and a rising police state during riots and pandemonium, during a giant economic shift that leads to a new economic paradigm, is a hell of a lot more likely than only 3 million people be. And listen to the video. 3 million people will be left out of 300 million. It'll be 3 million of the most cutthroats and the preppers. And the 3 million will come after us, and it'll be like freaking, I don't know, zombie Armageddon, Apocalypse Now, Red Dawn, and Road Warrior all at the same time. Even in the Balkan Wars, and I've interviewed Spirko from Shit at the Fan School, who lived through and survived the Balkan Wars. Even in the Balkan Wars, it was pockets of this. There was still commerce, there was still exchange. And that was a civil war, not an economic collapse. You want to know what an economic collapse is like? Talk to people that dealt with one. Talk to Fernando Aguirre. Talk to friends like I have. Valery Azanov, that was a member of the KGB in the Soviet Union, when the Soviet Union collapsed, and said I had two choices, Jack. I could either leave or I could join the new Russian mafia because no one else would have anything to do with me once they knew what I was. And I'm not a bad guy, in spite of what you've been told about me, and I didn't want to join the mafia, so I left. This is the reality facing America. Yes, it will be worse, but it will also be the same. Every time somebody's preached doomsday, whether it's the second coming or anything else, you've been told something that's true and a lie at the same time. It's different this time. It's different. It's always different because it's a different time in history. But it's also always the same. Human dynamics are the same. Governmental dynamics are the same. And those that are ruthless and in power behave in the same way. We have no reason to believe that they'll do anything different this time around. Please be prepared for all contingencies. Look after each other. Take care of each other. Don't just prepare for warfare. Prepare to deal with a new reality. Mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, however you have to. Be prepared to feed yourself. Be prepared to look after and feed your neighbor. If you can't do that, there's no way we're going to come out of the other side of this okay. But if you can, this failure of the system can be what we hope it is, an opportunity. And let me tell you here as I close why. It's so important you understand why. That people want to gravitate to this fantasy that seems so much worse without rule of law, complete breakdown. They look at everything I've told you about and they know it's so horrible and so wrong. And they look at the mathematics of the numbers on the debt and they know it's wrong. And they look at everything and they go, it has to fail. And it's more horrifying to think about it failing and coming back together in some type of Terminator fashion and being worse. Remember the Terminator that would just get shattered into bits and then reconstitute itself? It's more horrifying to actually accept what I'm telling you for some people than to accept a complete and total breakdown. Because at least in a complete and total breakdown, it's you and the enemy. You have an even hand, a fighting chance. Don't prepare to have an even hand, a fighting chance, just because you have enough ammo, bullets, guns, training, medical supplies, and food. Be prepared to have no fair chance, no fair advantage, to be dealing with a superior enemy at all times, and one that's much more sophisticated than one that'll just shoot at you. One that'll take your liberty, take your wealth, step on your throat, and expect that you will thank them for it. That's what's going to happen, because it's what's always happened. The good news is there's hope that if we can stand through that, we can actually make the system better. But like most things, it'll get worse before it gets better. This has been Jack Spirko with a response to MainPrepper's video. Know this, sir, if you see this video response and you think I'm being in any way disrespectful, I respect the hell out of you. I thank you for your service. And when it comes to combat, I completely agree with you. When it comes to our future and what we're going to face, I think I've done more research. I think I have more knowledge. I think I have done more study of history. And I think my advice is better. And I think that people should take my advice and your advice, both of our advice, to heart. They should be prepared to use your advice for acute situations, and they should be prepared